Morning everyone, thanks for coming. We're here today in Seminyak, Bali for a workshop to do with finding and following a calling. I've written books on it and I've run workshops on it for close to 15 years now. The concept of a calling goes back in history. It's in every culture known to man, and it is based. The earliest book written that brings up the concept of calling was the original book that was ever written. It's called the Epic of Gilgamesh. It was written 5,000 years ago on clay tablets in Babylonia, what was then known as Babylonia. So it's a very ancient concept. More recently, 2,500 years ago, Plato, in his famous work The Republic, mentioned in the back of that book a chapter is called The Myth of which we'll have a look at later on. That refers quite specifically to the concept that every human being has a meaning and a purpose to their lives. Again, more recently, Maria Montessori, the great Italian educationalist who lived, I think, she was 1870 to 1950. She died in 1951. She believed that not only mankind, but every species on the face of the earth had what she called a cosmic task. In other words, a calling, or a purpose and a function to their existence. And let's have a look at that. This is the flowering daffodil. This is the height of the daffodil. This is when it's flowering. This is when it's you see it in all its beauty. And it lasts for sometimes days, depending on the weather, sometimes a few weeks in this condition. What happens gradually, as it continues with its existence, as it were, it drops down until it begins to die. It starts to lose its shape, lose its color, lose its form. And we're dropping down at the quarter past level to death. It's heading for death. Down here, the flowers disappear altogether, the stems perish, and the daffodil basically disappears in the depths of winter. As winter progresses into spring, we have the sun, we have the spring rains, we have the melting snow, and what do you get? In the midst of snow, there's a huge thing in London where it is reported in the newspapers, the sign of the first daffodil. People spot a daffodil in Hyde Park. The fan of the Daily Mail or the Guardian, they've seen the daffodils, and it's in the news. The first daffodil was sighted today. So what is that interest? You know, a flower? Why would that go into the national press? Well, unconsciously, it's a sign of the life force itself. It's like an unconscious affirmation that we live again, that this is not a real death. There's a flowering, there is a dying, there is a disappearing, and there is a rebirth. And here is the rebirth. It's quite startling. I've actually seen them in London. I've seen them in Ireland, coming through the snow. Walking across the fields in Ireland one day outside of Galway, and to my delight, I saw this little green thing poking through the snow. And I wasn't sure what it was, but I came back a few days later, and I suspected it was a daffodil, and it was. And you get a thrill seeing this life force emerging from apparent death. Okay, then it goes up again, of course, and grows up. The stem grows. The flower takes shape. Here's a bud here. And ultimately the buds open and it flowers once again. Very simplistic, very obvious. You've all seen this. What is it? In human terms, we can look at our own lives in a very similar way. The Hindus and various other religions have a belief in reincarnation. This is the flowering of the man or the woman. This is the aging of that human being. This is the death and the naben, the cremation or the burial or whatever that particular tradition takes in. But most religious traditions have this rebirth, that there's a heaven afterwards where we go to this other dimension. Again, the Hindus believe that they're reincarnated. In India, they believe that. In Bali, they believe that they're reincarnated into another life. So this is the origins, and again the flowering. Now then, when we look at this, what is the function of that? What is the function? Why does it flower? How does it flower? Well, the little fella here is called a pollen bee. And our other little friend here is a hummingbird. These are just two of the very common examples of how this flower flowers. Without these creatures and similar creatures, other creatures do the same thing. Without these performing their cosmic task, this flower would never flower. Because the honeybee and also the kingfisher goes into different types of flowers. He goes into the flowers seeking out nectar. He's looking for the nectar. What Montessori said was that every creature has a cosmic task. They have a primary task of survival, of eating, of procreation, and working in their own species or their own tribe or their own people. But they have a secondary, more important task, which is the cosmic task. The bee's cosmic task, he goes into these flowers looking for nectar to take back to the hive, which is then turned into honey. That's his primary function. Okay? Its cosmic task is as it goes from flower to flower. You can see him there. It's a wonderful photograph. He's covered in pollen from the flower. As he's looking for the nectar, the pollen is brushing off on his coat. He goes to the next flower, and the next flower, and the next flower. Flowers are male and female, and some are somewhere in between. And he pollinates the flowers as he goes on unconsciously. It's not an intentional thing, but it is its cosmic task. That is the function of the bee. Without that, these would never flower. Now, if you have a look at this photograph, you'll get some idea of the nature of the cosmic task. Look at this. Okay? Now, the bird here, the hummingbird, he's a remarkable example. If you'll see these flowers here, there are some flowers the bee cannot get into. Its body shape is wrong, it's too fat, it's too hairy, whatever it is. With the hummingbird, he has a long beak. He gets in the very deep throated flowers, goes right to the bottom of them, picks out the nectar, pulls it out, and off he goes. As he's doing that, again, the pollen goes off on his head and on his beak. There are special things that catch the pollen. He goes to the next flower, he's looking for nectar again, he does the same thing again. He in his own way pollinates all the flowers that he touches. That's the hummingbird's cosmic task. What is the cosmic task of the daffodil? These photographs will show you the cosmic task. You've seen wildflowers in spring in Ireland, in America, in England, in virtually any country in the world. This is a worldwide phenomenon. You'll know what it is. The bees, the birds, the flowers bring a beauty to our planet that, it's just a totally transcendent thing to look at. And on that point, every cosmic task and every calling in the human race is of a transcendent nature. It is higher than ourselves. It transcends ego, and it offers something back to the planet. We have a world today where in the last 100 years alone, we have brought the planet to its knees. It's an amazing thing. 100 years ago, if you'd have talked about the possibility of the Earth burning itself out, or being burnt out, I should say, by mankind, people would have locked you up. Would have thought you were insane. 100 years later, we are now looking at a possible use-by date on our own planet, solely by the efforts of man. None of the creatures can do that. We are the only species that threatens the viability of our own planet, and are doing so today. Our oceans are polluted, the air is polluted, the rivers are polluted, the animals are becoming extinct at an alarming rate. When they become extinct, as far as we know, we have great technology, but how are we going to bring them back? Is it possible? We're in the process of destroying our own planet. And how do we excuse that? We talk about growth, industrial growth, financial growth, the global village. We have all these wonderful terminologies, but what we have got to look at, and what we need to look at very quickly right now, is what about our children? What about our grandchildren? What are we offering to them? We're bankrupt now. What are we offering to our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren? Will they be able to exist on this planet in 100 years? Look at what we've done to it in 100 years, and the rate is increasing. The rate of destruction on the planet is increasing. You must have seen Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth. It's pretty well laid out there what we're doing to the planet. The ice caps are melting. There's a possibility that the ice caps will slip off. They're melting not just from the top, they're melting from underneath. There's a grave possibility they can reach a particular critical point and just simply slide into the ocean, which is just a staggering thing. It will raise water levels in all the low-lying countries. It will swamp islands. This is what mankind has done in 100 years. What's that to do with this? Mankind is the only species on the face of the earth that is not looking at its cosmic task. We're supposed to be the most intelligent creature, and we don't even know what our callings are. We don't even know if it's myth or fantasy to talk about a calling. And remember, calling is of a transcendent nature. If you're in your calling, I'll tell you now, you will not be harming the earth, the creatures of the earth, the ecosystem of the earth. I've never met a person in their calling who is damaging the planet. It's impossible. Calling is of a transcendent nature. It adds something back to your family, to your tribe, to your people, to the world itself. That's what we need to be teaching in school. That's when people ask, what should I do for a living? What should I do? What do your families tell you? Get a well-paid job with a good pension. But I don't want to be a banker. Just be a banker for 10 or 20 years. Do the other stuff later. We need to find out what are our children's gifts, what are their talents, what are their abilities, and more importantly, what is their calling? What are they being called to do?